So hello, everyone, and welcome to the third and final topical session on climate finance. So my name is Maiko Morishida. I am a program manager at the Finance Task Force at IGIS, where I undertake research on and provide policy implementation support on green and transition finance. And I have been given the privilege to be your moderator for this session. So mobilizing finance for climate is critical and an indispensable element in making the transition happen. So sessions throughout today and yesterday have focused on subnational climate action and on city-level exchange between EU and Japan. And this session will continue to have that focus. But this session will also look into measures, policies, and ongoing initiatives to mobilize climate finance at the local level, and also take particular note of the role financial institutions can and are playing in these initiatives. So we will have two presentations for this session, each 15 to 20 minutes long, one from the EU and the other from Japan, followed by a brief Q&A session. So now please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Mr. Jerry Muscat. Hello, Jerry.
Hello, Maiko.
Thank you for joining us today and making yourself available at such an early hour. So Jerry is the head of the Urban Advisory Division at the European Investment Bank and is responsible for EIB's advisory work with cities in areas of urban development, urban mobility, social and affordable housing, and of course, climate. So I believe Jerry is in the perfect position to give us an overview of EIB's climate initiatives, including the mobilization of finance at the city level. And I believe that is what he will do now. So over to you, Jerry. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Maiko. And it's a great pleasure to be speaking at this event. I have had the pleasure of visiting Japan, but I don't know very much about climate finance in Japan, so I'm looking forward to the next presentation as well. But I do know a fair amount about climate finance for cities in the EU. And I will be talking about a few initiatives and a few ways in which we at the EIB finance cities and also some EU-wide initiatives as well. So if you could go to the next slide, please. I would like to start with the next one. I'd like to start with a few words about the EIB, just for those of you who may not know what the European Investment Bank is. Next slide, please. So the EIB is actually Europe's climate bank, as we like to call ourselves. We finance infrastructure and SMEs and research and development, innovation, many things, both within the EU and outside. But climate is really a key theme for us, and we are also the world's largest multilateral lender, and some more than 50% of our financing is actually climate oriented now. Most of our financing is inside the EU, but we have around 10% in developing countries. We have about 4,000 staff. We have 59 offices covering most of the EU countries and many outside. And we provide a range of financing services, loans, blending, equity, guarantees, as well as advisory services. And we are owned by the EU member states. So next slide, please. And just a word on our urban program of lending. So we typically finance around between about 25 and 35% of our entire lending goes to cities and urban investment, and it's a mix of the big sectors, as you can see on the slide: urban mobility, water, urban regeneration, education, and various other areas. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So following a few words on the EIB, I wanted to just say that we typically finance the investments in cities directly by lending to cities, and we finance very often we finance what we call framework loans, where we lend to a city and finance a slice of the city's overall investment program, covering many sectors. But we also finance quite a lot through municipal banks and national promotional banks. And in fact, within the EU, there are many specialized financing institutions which have major programs of financing for cities. And the EIB works with those. So a number of those are shown on the screen there. Belfius is the big public finance lender in Belgium, which finances cities. And we have worked with regional banks like ILB in the German state of Brandenburg, and with the Polish BGK Bank, which finances investments in cities in Poland, and with many other banks across the EU through which we lend, also commercial banks. So next slide, please. Now, besides the lending, we also provide advisory services, and so in other words, we help cities to improve the quality of the investments that they are aiming to finance, and also help make them more suitable for financing by us or other lenders, by improving the financial and economic aspects of the projects, their feasibility, as well as the technical aspects. We also help cities to enhance their own skills in various different areas, and we help cities tackle their major challenges. So obviously today, climate is the one we will be talking about primarily, but also we support cities in terms of inclusion, resilience, digitalization, and improving their governance. Next slide, please. So just to give a couple of examples, we are supporting the Polish city of Rzeszów, which is in the southeast of Poland. Some of you may have read about it on the news. It's a small city, but it's become quite well known now because it's the gateway for entry into Ukraine, and so it's had a huge amount of migration from Ukrainians fleeing the war in Ukraine. So it is a city with a massive challenge of integrating something like a third more people into the city, so becoming a city from 200,000 to around 350,000, which obviously poses enormous challenges both for its general infrastructure and for climate. And the EIB is supporting the city through a loan that we financed, which covers more or less all the sectors of the city's investment program. And we're also providing advice to the city to help them create a climate neutral district, which will be a pilot program for the city to move towards climate neutrality. And we are helping them also with regeneration and the development of a new market hall building, which will be actually low carbon and will be very socially inclusive type of building, very much a trailblazer project for that city. Next slide, please. Just to give one other example, we work also with the city of Athens in Greece, which is clearly again a city facing major climate challenges in terms of adaptation to heat and intense rainfall events, and we're supporting that city in its multiple sectors of investment, mobility, housing, and so on. But also, particularly, we're helping them develop a program for urban greening, green-blue infrastructure, which can help the city mitigate, address the climate adaptation challenges that it faces. Next slide, please. So we'll talk about a few initiatives that are Europe-wide, which the IB is participating in, and very many of these will work together with the European Commission. Next slide, please. I would like to talk first about the EU mission on climate neutral and smart cities, which is a very interesting and widespread mission, which aims to bring 100 cities within the EU and 12 outside to climate neutrality by 2030. Next slide, please. As you can see, it's covering a very wide range of countries across the EU member states. Next slide, please. Now, the prior work before the mission was started estimated that on average, a European city of 100,000 people would need around €1 billion of investment to achieve climate neutrality. And that would cover a range of areas, particularly transport, buildings, heating systems, electricity systems and networks. And so they estimated around €10,000 per citizen would need to be invested to achieve this. And now, if you go to the next slide, what we are starting to see now is that the cities have been asked to submit action plans where they look at the actions they will take to achieve climate neutrality, and also investment plans that they will take to achieve climate neutrality. And indeed, that the idea of this is that they will have what are called climate city contracts, showing that they've gone through this process. And we at the EIB are working with the European Commission to look at these investment plans and see how credible they are and to what extent they will address the climate challenges, and also to identify areas in which they can be developed further. And I think one thing that's particularly interesting coming out of this is that you can see the climate challenge for these cities. For most cities, between about 70 and 90% of the investment need to help the city become climate neutral is actually not in the control of the city itself. It's actually investments in SMEs, it's in businesses, industry, or private individuals improving their mobility, electrification of mobility, and also their own private buildings to make them more carbon neutral. So this is where the big bulk of investment has to come, and we're talking here with these city contracts about the entire carbon footprint of the city, not just the carbon emissions from the city's own infrastructure. So I think that this is a very ambitious initiative. So far, something like 35 cities have gone through this process. And of course, it's a process which is ongoing, and the cities will need to refine their investment plans over time. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned, under the city's mission, enabling SMEs to become greener is one of the challenges. And next slide, please. I wanted to say, this can be done partly at the city level by cities themselves incentivizing the local businesses to become more efficient. It can also be done through national schemes, and at the EIB we do a lot of financing for SMEs. What we're trying to do now is help these small and medium enterprises become more climate oriented in their investment and have lower emissions. And in order to do that, we've set up something which we call a green eligibility checker. And we through this tool, which is online, SMEs and businesses can use this checker, and then intermediaries can use the checker to check the alignment to the EU taxonomy and the climate contribution of the investments. Next slide, please. So this is a combination of a tool plus advice that can be given to the financial institutions to help them. Next slide, please. So moving on to other facilities and other ways in which we can support climate neutrality. One of the areas I wanted to talk about is a facility called Elena, which is, if you move to the next slide, is about energy efficiency for mobility as well as buildings, and this is a program which enables cities to prepare investment programs and then deliver them. If you can move to the next slide, this facility funds roughly 90% of the project preparation costs for these type of investment programs, and typically involves a grant to the city between 1 and 3 million euro to help them with project management, feasibility studies, as well as the implementation, procurement, and implementation of investment. Next slide, please. And there are a few cities there which I've indicated, which show where we have done this in Zagreb on energy efficiency in Croatia, in Hamburg in Germany on the mobility side, and in Bydgoszcz and in Copenhagen on buildings. Next slide, please. So what's quite interesting about this program is that the advisory support to help the cities is only delivered where the city commits to a minimum investment program of 30 million euros. And so there is this obligation to invest. And so cities have to be very committed and serious about delivering investment before they receive the technical support. Next slide, please. So I'm conscious that time is moving by. So we also work quite a lot on sustainable urban mobility, and particularly on sustainable urban mobility planning, but also support to feasibility studies for urban mobility projects. And we are helping on EV charging for Greek cities, for example. EV charging is an important topic that cities are struggling with at the moment. Next slide, please. So I will finish with two other facilities that I thought worth mentioning. Next slide, please. So one is the new European Bauhaus, which some of you may have heard of. This is an initiative of the European Union to promote project development and investment in a way which embraces three key principles. One is sustainability, the other is social inclusion, and the other one is aesthetics. So the idea is to have beautiful buildings and districts, as well as sustainable buildings and districts, and inclusive ones. Next slide, please. So the final one I would like to mention is on circular economy, and here we are working again with the European Commission to set up a circular cities center, which supports cities with their ambitions for circular economy. And we are in the stage now where, if you move to the next slide, where we've already prepared quite some guidance documents for cities in terms of knowledge resources, and we have launched programs of advice to cities which will both, let's say, help them identify opportunities for circular economy investment and also help prepare the projects themselves. And if you move to the next slide, please. We are delivering this circular city program through these different modules, and the one which we are focusing particularly on at the moment is the last one on the right, the circular project advisory, where we are starting to identify actual projects which we can support feasibility studies for, which will deliver on circularity. And when we're talking about this, we're talking about circularity in areas of buildings, reuse of buildings, for example, which is a big theme now in the EU post-COVID, as we need fewer office buildings. We're building more social housing and converting them. Also in mobility, shared services, for example, mobility as a service, and several other areas as well. So I think that's basically it from me, and I will be happy to answer any questions in the later on in the after we've heard the other participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. That was very informative and comprehensive presentation, and I think it's certainly given us, the audience, a flavor of the breadth of projects that the EIB supports. And I think in one of your earlier slides, you mentioned that 80% of EIB direct urban lending contributed to the EIB climate action and environmental sustainability. And I think we could really see how climate is integrated and mainstreamed into EIB's urban development support. So thank you.